Hello everybody, it's Ellie Dix here. I'm here with Paul Dix.
Hello.
So today Paul's going to be answering some of your questions about behaviour. You've just come in from speaking to 13 different academy head teachers, I believe.
I've hot-footed it from East Croydon, but to our viewers in Australia that's going to mean very little, but a long way for England anyway.
Yeah. And talking to them about behaviour change and behaviour policy and things, I think. It's interesting, okay. And so Paul's going to be answering your questions, most of which have been already posted into the Canvas platform. But in addition to that, you can post your own questions into the chat on the screen on your right hand side. So please keep doing that as we go along, and we'll try and answer as many of them as possible. Last time we had quite a lot of really interesting questions, which were quite thought-provoking, Paul, didn't we? And this week we have had some questions which aren't necessarily within the scope of this course. So questions about sort of extreme behaviour, specific behaviour needs, mental health issues and things are sort of outside the managing behaviour for learning in the classroom and laboratory that we're currently focusing on. So we're going to focus on those questions that fall within the scope of this course. Okay, so without further ado, Paul, we're going to crack on with question one.
Okay.
Jan asks, in week 3, you asked us to organise a praise or recognition system. My system seems to be working with most pupils. Okay. However, there remains to be a few pupils for whom the praise system holds no interest. How can I engage the pupils who don't seem to care about praise or want to be noticed?
Okay, good question. Hello, Jan. Hello, everyone. I think it's quite early days, isn't it? I mean, that recognition board, you've probably had it up for maybe a week or 10 days. So the fact that you've got lots of those learners engaged with it, happy to be on that praise or recognition board, I think you're going really well. You are going to have some children for whom praise is not normal, for whom their self-esteem, their confidence is so low that they don't think that the recognition board is for them. So they are going to take a little bit longer, but there will be a few things you can do to try and encourage them. I think the first thing to do is, rather than giving them the sort of public recognition, is to say to the rest of the group, perhaps during the lesson or perhaps at a point where you are filling out that recognition board, look, I've got 2 students here, I'm not going to say who they are, but they have just earned you another 2 places on your recognition board. You could represent them with a star, with a smile. You wouldn't necessarily need to put their names up. And in fact, you can do the recognition board without names. You could do it more discreetly just by allocating ticks or stars for different learners. So you could get them onto the recognition board that way. The other way you can do it is to give them the pen and put them in charge of writing other learners' names onto the board. Not for the whole lesson, that would be a bit weird, but periodically during the lesson, right, can you put these, so they get that idea that actually, that they can be part of that, even if they're not desperate to get their own name up. And then the last thing I'd say is try and do some private praise with those learners, because maybe it's too soon for them to be up on that recognition board. Maybe they need the quiet word, the little bit of encouragement, the extra line that you write as feedback at the end of their written work. And maybe you can just try and build their confidence. I mean, it's really interesting that you have immediately identified those few learners. I mean, that in itself has given you more information about those children. And I wouldn't see that as a negative. I'd see it as as interesting, and to try and build them from that private praise to taking charge, and then eventually to having their name or their symbol or their colour on the board so they know it's them, but the rest of the class don't know.
Okay, and is it fair to say, Paul, that there are some pupils that really take a long time to take that praise from you? That really, that are looking, they're trying to test you, aren't they, to see if you're being serious?
Yeah, I mean, if you imagine if you've been in school and your experience of school was never getting praise, getting a lot of criticism, being in the bottom set, struggling on the bottom table, knowing full well that actually you're not keeping up with the rest of the class, then you would find it odd that somebody then comes and praises you. So I think, we've talked about it on the course as well, but that praise has got to be sincere. And the way that you do that with learners who don't know you is actually to show them the work and the reason why you're praising them. If you come to year 11, so, in other countries, so 15, 16-year-old children, you start praising them about how marvellous it is they brought their pencil case, it's not going to wash. It's not sincere, it's not meaningful. But if you actually go through their investigation write-up and you point out the bits that you see as being pretty much top grade work, and here's some, the diagram's fantastic, the writing is detailed, the vocabulary has depth, and actually give them examples of why you're giving them praise, even if they don't accept it in the moment, it will make them stop and think. And of course, your biggest friend in all of this is the positive note and the positive phone call home, because you want the parents to also be echoing that reinforcement, that positive reinforcement to the learner. And it may be with some of these learners that some of those problems do stem from home, in that the parent is very slow to praise, and maybe some encouragement to do that at home would also be beneficial.
Thanks, Paul. That's really useful. Can you give me some ideas about how to deal with the class clown? This is a question from Kieran. This is usually a nice pupil, but one who'll take any opportunity to make a smart or funny comment. And I think there's one in most classes, isn't there?
Yeah.
It's a sort of perennial behaviour.
The hardy perennial. It might have been me when I was a younger, better looking man. Look, I think you can't deal with the class clown in public. And that's the mistake a lot of people make. Unless you are supremely confident, your banter is at the top of its game, and you're able to use witty put downs that don't hurt too much, I'd stay away from publicly trying to embarrass or humiliate that class clown. What you need to do is you need to sit down with them. You need to make a few notes about times where they've made comments that they thought were funny, but actually have slightly disrupted your lesson and caused the pace to drop or caused other learners to be pulled off task. I think you need to speak to that learner about it and need to sketch out for them what you are going to do if they continue to make witty, funny, cheeky comments as you're speaking or as you're trying to teach the class. And I think you need to go for your sanctions steps, and you need to treat those comments, even though the child thinks they're funny, even though some of the other members of the class think they're funny, you need to apply your sanctions. So you give the reminder, it happens again, you give the warning, it happens again, you give last chance, with your 30-second intervention and that script, which is constantly repeated, and then you give them a timeout. But I don't actually think you're going to solve this purely by throwing sanctions at it. I think what you need to do is to speak to the child, is to come up with a plan. What is going to happen next lesson? Right? If you choose to make funny comments and disrupt and disturb the lesson, then I am going to take you down these steps, and here they are, and this is what I'll say to you. And I'd also even go through the 30-second intervention script with them and let them know the words that are going to be spoken. I really, really like the behaviour management to be out on the table. I like the children to know what I'm going to do so that I'm absolutely safe and predictable. I don't really like behaviour management for teachers that's sort of hidden away in a cupboard and the children have to work out what's going on. I like to be really upfront about it. Then I think you need to make sure that you've got it sketched out and you visualise for that child what's going to happen when they do the right thing. So how is that child going to be reinforced? And you're going to have to be quite keen to it. So first 10 minutes of the lesson, there's no funny comments. The child is focused on their work. Go over and say, thank you, I really appreciate it. And make sure they know that you're keen to them making the effort not to make those comments. I think the last thing that you could do is find an outlet. Kids that are funny and witty, we don't want to put them down all the time. We want to try and channel that enthusiasm, that humour, because it could be a very positive force for good. So think about how you could do that. Do you want to set up an assembly so the child can present in assembly? Do you want to give them the opportunity to do a presentation to the class? Do you want to give that child a responsibility in the group so that it slightly diverts the need to constantly grab the attention by making the whole class laugh? So is part of that discussion with the child, look, I'd like you to take responsibility for for setting up the groups or for giving out the resources, so that there's a real plan for the next lesson and then for the next few lessons. You've got to get that child into the routine so that they understand that there's good positive reinforcement for doing the right thing, that there's an outlet for their humour, their enthusiasm, but it's not in lesson time, and that actually you don't want to push that learner out, you want to involve them. The sanctions, as always, are your last resort, and you should use them and you should apply them. But as always with behaviour management, it's a two-pronged approach, isn't it? It's getting their attention through those consequences, making sure you draw those boundaries, but really flipping over to the positive side of making sure they're recognised for when they resist the temptation and the urge to make those comments. And I think in that way you can have an impact on the individual. You may have an opportunity, and I've done this before with the rest of the group when that child is away, just to speak to the rest of the group about stopping encouraging that. So if you can stop the reaction, that's really positive as well. But that's all about your relationship with that group. Do you know them well enough to be able to speak to them as a group without implicitly criticising the child when they're away? Can you manage that properly? But I think there is a bit of responsibility on the rest of the class not to keep looking to that child. We're not doing that anymore. That's finished. The learning time is too precious, and what I need you to do, if he does decide to make a smart comment, is resist the urge. And again, your positive reinforcement to them, which will be much more subtle, might be non-verbal, a bit of a thumbs up and a thank you, if and when that happens. I think you've got a few ideas there that you can start to pick away. But make sure when you speak to the child, you've got that you've got a bit of time to do it, that if you need to, you get a colleague to come and sit with you, the child doesn't see it as some sort of punishment, but that actually you're making a plan to just change that certain behaviour. Don't expect things to go brilliantly immediately. You'll probably get the first week, be great, and then as your attention moves to other learners, you'll find that learner might well slip off the wagon. So you need to keep that 30-day idea. We'll change a habit by reinforcing the good stuff and drawing the line, but we'll do it over 30 days. We're not going to pretend that a few days is going to be enough to change that child's habits.
Thanks, Paul. That's brilliant. I think while you were talking, I was thinking about the fact that, this is all about behaviour for learning, for the sake of learning. And it's very easy for the teacher to get into the position where they think, well, this child's not being malicious with their behaviour. They're just getting a bit of a laugh and everybody's enjoying it, and therefore it isn't a problem. But of course it's about that behaviour for the sake of learning, isn't it?
See, I will really tighten down on things like staying on task, which is and children just slipping off task. And I'll often go to the learners who previously have never had any issue in terms of behaviour, and I'll start to tighten down my consistency so that I've got a stay on task rule or the one voice rule, and make sure that the behaviour expectation is constantly being tightened. This is not about let's get some basic minimums in place and then forget about them. I'm constantly, all the time, tightening the consistency, raising the expectations in terms of routines, and raising the expectations in terms of praising over and above. I'm never satisfied. We want exemplary behaviour. We don't just want to get behaviour managed. We want it to be as good as you can see it in your head. So that, when you imagine that perfect lesson and you imagine that perfect class, that's what we're aiming for. And we're going to make it to that, but we need to just squeeze down each time. And part of it is, sometimes squeezing down on behaviours that the children have previously thought were just, kind of what we did, like chatting a little bit when we're supposed to be on task, or moving around the room when we're supposed to be in a group. Oh, nobody else does us for that. Well, I do, because this is my classroom. My expectations are that you should be on task from the beginning of the lesson to the end. And my expectation is that you put your hand up and you ask me before you stand up and start touring the room. So I think, very often we target with our behaviour management probably the worst behaved children, but there's a real advantage as you're starting to employ different strategies and a different climate in your classroom, actually to show those children who are well behaved that the standards for them are also going to have to rise. That this is not about bringing the tricky children up to a minimum standard, but this is about raising everyone's expectation and everyone's standard of behaviour, regardless of their starting points.
Oh, that's really good. Thanks, Paul. Okay, so the next question, let's move on.
Okay.
This is from Marcus. He says, I've implemented some of your ideas on praise and reward.
Okay, good.
And the impact has been positive.
Great.
I'd like to know how you keep this positive focus on behaviour sustained for the long term without falling back into bad habits.
It's pretty exhausting, right? I mean, you don't have to be the bouncy clown to be positive. You know that. I mean, you're not a performer in that sense. But I absolutely get, quite easy to be positive on a Monday, on a Tuesday. Yeah, it's okay. By Wednesday, you're struggling a little bit because you're knackered and the frustration is getting on top of you. Look, it's about your keystone routines. It's about what you do every day that is exactly the same. And the meet and greet is the perfect example of that. Because it's very, very difficult to stand at the door with a massive smile on your face, putting your hand out to shake the hands of learners and sustain a sort of a negative attitude within yourself. It's infectious. And so what I find is if I stand at the door on a meet and greet, that starts to affect my mood as well as the mood of the children. It makes that really positive whoosh to the beginning of the lesson. Now, we know that if you start the lesson like that, the chances are the whole lesson will be positive and the children pick up on that positivity. It's not for you to be this sort of ball of energy through 6 lessons a day, 5 days a week, 6 weeks, 7 weeks in a term. I think actually the children will start to pick up on that. So look, keystone routines, meet and greet at the door. I do it all the time. I do it every day because it puts me in the right frame of mind. Recognition board. Keystone routine. I mean, it's very difficult when you're catching children doing the right thing. Thank you so much. That's over and above. You haven't just hung your coat up. You've picked your coats. You've picked everyone else's coat up from the floor. You're going on the board. Once you start working that recognition board, once you start working the meet and greet, and you might have some other keystone routines that put you into that positive state of mind, what happens is you go into the routine and actually the routine takes care of your mood. And it becomes less about how I'm feeling and much more about, well, this is what we do in this classroom. Look, in order to make this change, you need to have that 30-day period as well. So, sustain it for 30 days and positivity starts to become a bit of a habit. You also, if you're having trouble with the positivity, you'd probably read Andy Cope's book, The Art of Being Brilliant. He's coming onto our podcast in a couple of weeks' time, and he has some lovely little ideas for stopping the negative triggers that seem to circulate when you're extremely tired. So I think the other thing you can do is put in systems and processes into your classroom so that the children keep you on the good foot. So, using the positive notes and having a little of time of the week where you do the positive notes. Do you have a student of the week and celebrate that? Do you have a birthday bonus? Do you know when the children's birthdays are? And do you do something small and special for them on their birthday? So those, it's partly your keystone routines and your positivity. It's partly infecting the children with that. But it's also about putting in little markers so that you know positive things are going to happen even if it's a difficult week. And we all have difficult weeks. And we're supposed to get it right 8 out of 10 times, not 10 out of 10. But I find that, even after a difficult day on a Friday, if I know I'm going to do a couple of positive notes, that puts me in the right frame of mind, and it makes me, balance the difficult stuff that's happened and the tricky conversations and the awkward behaviour, and it allows me to refocus on the children that are doing the right thing. And one of the things we say constantly at Pivotal in training, and one of the ways we work with teachers constantly, is talking to them about their own perspective. So when you wake up in the morning, when you think about your class, when you think about the classes you're about to teach, what's your focus? Because most teachers are focused on the worst behave. They're thinking, if he turns up today, it's going to be all over, and I don't know if I'll do that exercise because Reese can't be trusted on that. We're totally focused on the small issues with the worst behaved. It's that classic black spot on a white page. You can't see anything but the black spot. And you miss the fact that the rest of the page is white. How many teachers miss the fact that 95% of their learners come every day, they're well behaved, they're well mannered, they're polite, they do everything you asked, they live your values and the school values every single day. Once you focus on that, you start to get a bit of perspective. But I know how difficult it can be when you've got a couple of children that are just constantly repeating the same behaviours. your attention gets skewed and you start to think that it's all a disaster. Get your focus back on the 95% and maybe go through a little ritual in the morning where you deliberately make yourself do that, and then go through your keystone routines during the day.
I think that's right, Paul. And you talked a couple of times there about routines and embedding things and keeping, these sort of mantras that you keep saying to yourself. And I think that's all down to what you often talk about habits, isn't it? It's about once those habits are embedded, like now, if you're just making a big change to the way that you're managing behaviour, that's going to seem exhausting, isn't it? But over time, that becomes more habitual. And then you can use that because it's just much more of a natural thing.
Absolutely. And all the scientific research around habits are pointing to the fact that when the brain is asleep, habits take over. So you behave in certain ways, not because you've thought about behaving in that way, but because it's totally habitual. So, a lot of 13-year-olds are half asleep when they come to your lesson first thing in the morning, but they seem to behave immaculately. They're not thinking about how to behave. They're totally routined into it, which is why that relentless pursuit of routines that build habits means that you stop having to talk about behaviour because it's just habitual. Now, you know this because you've seen expert teachers who have the most incredible routines in their classroom. They don't even seem to manage behaviour at all. That it's all hidden, and that's because they have spent time building routine on routine that become habit after habit. And learners walk into their room and unthinkingly shake their hand, smile at them, go to their desk, get that. It's totally automated. They don't think twice about it, which is why, as a new teacher or a teacher going to a new job, building those routines one on the other. I mean, it's kind of laborious and it's kind of tedious, but the results you get at the end are so worthwhile doing that. Those teachers that rush in and try and teach 100 behaviours at once and 15 different routines find themselves in all sorts of difficulties because they haven't actually taught one routine well enough before going on to another one and another one, and actually you've forgotten, or the children have forgotten, the first routine. So it's really important that we layer these routines and we get them really, really embedded. 30 days, it seems like a long time, but it takes that long to change someone's routine, and you might argue it takes a little bit longer for that to become an unthinking habit.
Brilliant, thanks, Paul. Okay, so the next question, I've adapted this one, I have to say.
Okay.
Because the question was very specific about a certain cohort of children that were in a certain situation. In fact, it wasn't really children, it was learners in FE. Okay. So I've made it slightly more generic because I think actually the underlying question is really applicable to everybody.
Okay.
How can I manage students' attitudes to learning and behaviour when they come to the lesson with so much personal baggage? So I've adapted that from a question submitted by Margaret Ann Cousins, who was asking about her 16 to 18-year-old health and social care students who seem to come with all sorts of personal issues.
Yeah, okay, look, this is going to sound quite harsh, but hopefully I'm going to explain myself. I firmly believe that one of the principles in a great classroom is that learning time is sacrosanct. And when you walk into a classroom, it's learning time. And I'm constantly reminding learners of the fact that this is learning time. From the child who wants to show me a photograph of their new pet that I'd actually quite like to see, but it's learning time, to the girls who get their makeup out, it's learning time, to somebody who wants to talk about a political or a news story that I really would quite like to talk about. No, it is learning time. And we're going to make that, it's so important that we don't spend our learning time unpacking behaviour or unpacking personal issues, or honestly being diverted by some learners who are really good at just diverting you off onto your favourite subject or their favourite subject, wasting 10 minutes, and you've lost the learning time. Look, a friend of mine works in the trouble spots in the world. She goes to train teachers in places where most of us wouldn't go. She's in the Yemen, she's in the Gaza Strip, she's in Egypt, and one of the things that she comes back and says is, look, in these places where classrooms are filled with children in poverty, who are really struggling with personal baggage, who live in the most abject poverty, who have personal issues that make their hair stand on end, when you've got classes full of them, she says, you know what teachers do? They hang a carrier bag on the door and they say to their learners, put your problems in the bag, you can take them and pick them up on the way out. Now look, that sounds a bit harsh, but you understand that those children in desperate situations are not going to be saved by talking through their personal issues with every teacher they're supposed to be learning from. What's going to help them more than anything is getting a really good education. And I think if those schools in those places can do that, then we can do something similar and just constantly be saying to the learners, no, this is learning time. Of course, what you also need to do in order to balance that is be available for when the children do want to talk to you. I mean, if you're working in a primary school or with younger children, you constantly get those arguments about football, don't you, coming in from break. And it seems, the football arguments and what happened at break and she said that and that note was, it just disrupts the first 20 minutes of a lesson. So, even when the children are coming back in from break, I'm standing at the door and I'm reminding them as they walk in, this is learning time. You need to finish that conversation. No, stand aside for a moment, finish that conversation, because when you walk into my room, this is learning time. And you make that point at the door and you make it, even for the child who's wildly excited and wants to share something with you, you still have to make the same point. And then you have to say to them, look, I'll be there at break time. If you want to come and see me, if the football argument is still so important at the end of this lesson, stay in at break, I'll be here, we can talk about it then. How many children actually do that? Very few. But you leave the door open. I'm here at lunchtime. There's pastoral support in the school. There's student services. There are 1,000 different people and ways where we can talk informally, but this is learning time. And I think that has served me very, very well working with working in very, very difficult situations where children almost expect that when they make an off-the-cuff remark or they produce something, that we should suddenly stop and focus on what they're talking about. It takes a while, and they'll say to you, oh man, you're a bit boring. Yeah, well, no, I'll talk to you at lunchtime, at break, after school, but this is learning time. And I think that's one of the boundaries for me that's not flexible at all.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you, Paul. Okay, let's move on to the next question. What are your suggestions for disruptive behaviour that you can't pin on individuals? For example, knocking under tables, strange noises, humming maybe, where several children are deliberately doing this in a way that's very hard to see. I remember doing this as a child.
Well, you were clearly a terrible student. I, for one, was immaculately behaved, as you can imagine.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Yes. Well, no, it was a particular chemistry teacher that had to suffer this in our school. Okay.
Well, I think it's not nice, is it? It's horrible. It normally happens when you've got a new class. It's quite rare for that to be a situation where this is where you've been with the class for say 6 months. I'm imagining this is a new class, a new group, a new school. They don't quite know you well enough yet. Okay, look, what I'm not going to do is ignore it and pretend it might go away, because it won't. And I'm not going to ignore it because also they then think that that's okay. If I'm deliberately ignoring it, it seems that I'm almost saying that that's fine, that behaviour. So I'm going to go through a short little process with the group. The first thing I'm going to do is make it absolutely clear that I can see what's happening, that it's not acceptable, and that I am going to do something about it. I'm then going to call on support of other members of staff who know these children well, the form tutor, their history teacher who's taught them for the last 3 years, they're a member of staff who's worked with them before. And I'm going to talk to that member of staff, because that member of staff will know, firstly, who's orchestrating it. They'll be able to talk to the group about it. You'll be able to triangulate yourself. So if that teacher has the respect of the class, and that teacher also tells the class that they have your respect, then there's a little triangle going on where the children will eventually realise that the two of you are quite tight together, and that what they do to you is reflected back onto that teacher as well. So make the point to the class, get some support, get them to make the point to the class as well, and then I would invite people to drop into your lessons, so that just for the next week or so, just to check. And you're not asking them to drop in so that they're suddenly issuing a load of punishments. You're asking them to drop in to catch the class doing the right thing and to share in the good, focused concentration that's going on. Now I'm going to suggest a couple more things as well, because after you've made that point and you've had a bit of support, the other thing you can do is to start to just try a few bits and pieces. Play some music. and have some music in silent or quiet working time so that the tapping, the knocking becomes irrelevant. Do more group work or set them off on more independent tasks. Resist the urge, and we talk a lot about this at Pivotal, especially when you're working in a new school or a newly qualified teacher, resist the urge to stand at the front of the class and spend a vast proportion of your lesson just talking, because if you reduce your teacher talk time severely just in the next couple of weeks, the opportunities for them to hum, tap, or disrupt, or orchestrate disruption are going to be taken away from them, and then they'll start to get into a better pattern of response for you. So I think, just think about how you're designing your lessons. One of the things we do at Pivotal an awful lot is just to do a little experiment with teachers on teacher talk time. So interesting, if you get a responsible child, or if you're lucky enough to have a teaching assistant or a learning support assistant, just a time on Friday, first lesson, how long you stand at the front of the group speaking to the whole class. Next week, Friday, first lesson, you take that figure, let's say it was 20 minutes out of an hour lesson, and you're allowed half of that. Next, same lesson, the week after, cut it down by a half again. And could you go one more? Yeah, I think you probably could. Next Friday, first lesson, cut it in half again, and just test yourself. It's not an argument that group works better than standing at the front of the class. It's nothing about that at all. It's just about regulating that time. And you might find that by shorter bursts of teacher talk time, with a little bit more independent work and perhaps some music just to give the room a slightly different atmosphere, and with the support of a member of staff, I don't think it'll last long. Partly it is them getting used to you and testing you out and seeing whether you're going to lose your rag. What they really, really want you to do is lose it. Okay, it's designed. An orchestrated behavioural response like that is designed to try and make you blow. So don't. And don't flinch, don't show any kind of negative response to it at all. Just poker face, really. Just absolute poker face. I can see what's happening. I know what you're doing. You need to stop that now. Let's get on. And for a couple of lessons, that's going to be tricky. But once you get over that hump, I think you'll find that with a few of those strategies, that it will come good.
Yeah, it's really interesting, Paul, and a great question from Matt. I think it's something that everybody faces at some time or other.
I'm being slightly disingenuous. My history teacher,
slightly.
Yeah, slightly. I shouldn't really say it on a webinar, but his problem was that he couldn't really hear what was going on beyond the first row. So if you were sat anywhere from the first row backwards, you could basically do anything you wanted to. But that orchestrated humming was something I've certainly borne witness to. I'm not going to admit to anything.
Something you orchestrated, I'm sure. Okay. While you were talking there, I was just thinking about I was just thinking about the fact that it's that sort of teacher talk time is such a critical thing, isn't it? And it's so difficult to be aware of that unless you've got someone holding up the mirror. Either you're recording it yourself surreptitiously, or you're asking a trusted student or a teaching assistant or somebody, but it's really very difficult to actually know at the end of the day how much time you've been demanding the attention of the whole class for. Do you remember we have a colleague that we both used to work with called Karen, a drama teacher, and she spent a whole week once, didn't she, doing no teacher talk time to the whole class at all as an experiment.
No, she did silent teaching. She did no talk whatsoever for an entire week. Wow. I'm not suggesting that. No. Okay, whoa, everyone. She's a very highly experienced teacher. But it was really fascinating how the children reacted to that. She didn't speak for a whole week. She did not speak. I'm not going to claim that the children learnt more than they did when she was speaking. But interesting, how much can you reduce it by, and what effect does that have on your learning? It's just a really interesting experiment.
I think it is, and it also makes you be creative about how you're teaching and how you're getting attention, which you can rely upon with noise if you're not careful, can't you?
And we're all prone to just saying that other thing, or I'll just say this now, or I'll just go on a little bit, or I'll just, because the children will sit there and listen, most of them. So you tend to extend that time a little bit too far, and then you get a bit of disruption. You realise you've gone too far. I mean, I've sat and observed teachers who tell me that they don't talk to the class very often and not much. And in a primary school, I was observing a teacher for the whole morning. She talked to the whole class for 2 hours, and the morning was 3.5 hours, and that was a break. So there was an hour where she wasn't talking, but she had no idea that that's what she was doing. She was absolutely convinced that she didn't talk very much, didn't demand the attention of the class very much. It just become habitual again. And I think Ellie's absolutely right. Unless you have that mirror held up to you, how would you know? Lots of people video, but I think the timekeeping works really well, because it allows also you to have that conversation with the teaching assistant, or just to reflect on your own exactly how far you went.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Okay, let's move on. Next question, Paul.
Crikey,
well, I put
yes.
2 on the same page because they're quite similar. So Stella asks, can you give suggestions on how you deal with students who repeatedly misbehave?
Yeah.
What if the rules are set, the learners are being reminded about the rules, but sanctions have little or no effect?
Yeah.
And similarly, Kirsten says, what do you do with the pupil who's consistently disruptive and pushes the sanctions on every lesson?
Okay, so the first thing to say is they are naturally testing you out, so expect any new system that you put up or announce to the children or try and embed, that there'll be some children, some learners who will immediately go to the end of every sanction or try and get every reward. They'll test you to see if you're actually serious about it. And learners who sort of gallop through the sanctions might get the idea that they've broken the system. So we do need to be careful about how we respond to those learners. I think the first thing to say is, if a child was finding it difficult to spell and you were using spelling lists and they weren't working, then you would change your strategy to meet the needs of the child. And I think behaviour is exactly the same. What you're saying is, look, I'm punishing the child, but nothing's changing. Well, then it would be odd to just continually go around the same wheel, right? And I think what's clear for children for whom sanctions seem to have no effect is that we're not getting to the root of the problem. We're just trying to deal with the symptoms. So you are going to have to spend some time. You are going to have to unlayer this behaviour. You're going to have to find out what is at the root cause of this behaviour, rather than how can I manage these symptoms. Now that's difficult. It's going to involve other members of staff. It's going to involve you in restorative conversations and conversations with the child. It's going to need that rapport and relationship building. Very often, those children that sort of gallop or through all the sanctions are children who are finding it difficult to trust you. It's an odd thing to say, but they are testing you to see if you're going to give up on them. And lots of those children who have poor experiences with adults will naturally try and test every single adult they meet. I mean, if you had an adult who broke their trust with you when you were a young child, you would come to every single relationship with suspicion. So you may be experiencing that. You need to differentiate, and there's no problem in differentiating in behaviour management. Very often the people who sort of panic about it are the adults. They say, well, you can't treat one child differently to the other. Well, we do in learning all the time. And so why wouldn't we in behaviour? The children will understand that we have to treat Natasha differently to the way that they're treated. They'll understand that. And it's really important. That the kind of mantra of, in order to be fair, I don't need to be equal. And I think children get that, because they get it in learning and they get it in behaviour. So what would I do with that child who's galloping through the sanctions? Well, the first thing is I'd be sitting down with them. I'd be making a plan with them. I'd resist. I said one of the ways I'd differentiate is with other children, I might be quite timely with my sanctions, and I might step through reminder, warning, last chance, time out with a little take-up time of 2 minutes. But with some children, I might cajole them a little bit more before I started down that track, or there might be gaps in between the reminder and the warning where I'm using more cajoling, more distraction, more light touch techniques. I'm going to try and slow down the process of stepping them through the sanctions, because otherwise you buy into the idea that all I have to do is misbehave 3 times and I'm out of the room. That's not what we've designed this behaviour policy to be. And I think you need to see those classroom steps not as a process to go through and suddenly everything's all right, but to use it as, great teachers, great behaviour managers are problem solvers, aren't they? They don't reach for a process when they see a child misbehaving. They look at the child, they think of their strategies, they look at their process to see what parts of it are going to be useful, and then they employ that. So I think you are going to have to differentiate. You are going to have to slow down those sanctions. You are going to have to think about what's the positive stuff I'm doing for this learner, and how can I make sure that even though I am having to step them through and have some difficult conversations with them, how can I make sure that they actually are still getting the message that they do have potential, that they could behave well, that I am going to catch them and recognise it when they behave well. And I'd like, I know it's time consuming and difficult, but I'd like you to be able to get to the point where even if a child has had to leave the room or got through 3 steps of the sanctions, that still at the end of the lesson you can say to them, yeah, but the presentation of your work was excellent today. And actually when you were focused and when you were on task, you managed to complete almost 2/3 of that task. So starting to reflect back some of the positives so they get that balance. So it's not all, it's been a difficult lesson, I've galloped through the sanctions. There's a balance to it. Actually, there's some good stuff going on here and there's some stuff I need to address. But it is, unlayering behaviour is about conversations with the child. It's about information gathering with other members of staff who've known them for a long time. I'm going to guess again that we've got learners who are getting to know you and realising that some children will take months to trust a new adult. And they are almost testing you to the point, you hear it all the time in schools, don't you? Teachers who say, well, I've tried everything with this child, because they try a strategy for a week and then give up, or they say, nothing works with him. So they're waiting for those little give up phrases, because then they can put you in the same box as every other adult who's given up on them. I think your persistence, your resilience is going to be tested here. So it's slowing it down. It's having that conversation with the child that you might have to have once a week just to review how it's going. It's about explaining to the other children that sometimes you may not be equal, but you're absolutely going to be fair. And in your own head, reconciling the differentiation because in behaviour, because that's what we do in learning. And actually, every teacher will tell you that we have to, it's slightly different for every child. I use praise for over and above, but I know and you know that some children need that over and above praise and that little nudge of reinforcement every half an hour. Some need it once a week. Some don't seem to need it more than once every half term. So we differentiate that positive intervention. I think we should be able to differentiate the sanction steps as well.
What you were just saying there, Paul, about differentiating positive behaviour management is really interesting, isn't it? Because I think that whilst you as a teacher know that you need to differentiate, it's very easy to get into that situation where you over-reward students that misbehave because they've sat there for 5 minutes. And I know that you've got some techniques that are useful, particularly with sort of positive notes, giving out quarters and things like that, of positive notes, that you can just make sure they get that bit of positive, that recognition without it obviously being as much as someone who's done a bit more.
I think the thing with learners who are in patterns of poor behaviour is they're very, very, very good at gaming the system. So whatever sort of behaviour game is in your school or in your classroom, and we've talked about naughty names on the board and how ridiculous that is, and we've talked about token economies and about how they're inherently corrupt because no 2 teachers will ever give a merit or a star for the same thing. I think those learners who are prone to going on to the negative path, they are very, very skilled at playing the behaviour game. So don't put the games up in front of them, which is why we're constantly talking to teachers about one person's behaviour is your business and yours only. The behaviour of the rest of the class, the behaviour of that child is not the business of the rest of the class. So we'll do as much as we can privately so that we don't allow the attention that some of those children really feed off. So gaming, gaming's interesting, isn't it? How many children are appallingly behaved Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, but on Friday, when there's some kind of reward or you're giving out the positive notes, or they suddenly turn on the good behaviour and they come to you and say, oh, I've been really good today, what do I get? And it's really important that you resist the urge to overload them with reward when they do that. And I think Ellie's point about the positive note is really important. I was at Sussex University we were at a school down in Brighton. I'd done a presentation for 350 newly qualified, 350 teachers in initial teacher training. And, in training, I always talk about the positive note and how, you give one positive note to a child who's gone over and above for 5 days, but you give a quarter of the positive note to Reese when he has one great day in 4 days of chaos. So he knows that it's going to take him 4 weeks to get the same positive note that Natasha had in a week. And so I've been talking to the initial teacher trainers about that. We came out, 350 people, poured out. I walked up the stairs and there was a guy in a high-vis jacket and he stopped me. He said, Paul, I came to your session last year. I'm using a recognition board. I'm using positive phone calls and I'm using positive notes home. And he specifically said, and he brought out of his pocket a quarter of a positive note. He said, I've been ripping up positive notes this morning because there's one child who doesn't deserve a full one, but can get, has one great day out of 5 average days. He said, I started at the beginning of the year. I use it all the time. It's fantastic. So, that's a really nice way of resisting the gaming. And I think lots of teachers get into a pickle because they set up lots of behaviour games and then they wonder why children become expert at playing them, which is why at Pivotal we are constantly on, there's only 3 that we need. We praise over and above, positive notes home, 2 at the end of every week, 1 positive phone call. It's enough. I mean, you can do your star of the week. You can have a sticker for individuals as long as they're not competitive. But don't overcomplicate it, because the simpler it is, the more consistent you can be and the fairer you can be to the children.
And that's the thing, isn't it? How fair you're perceived as being by the children is so important, not just with your relationship with those children, but your relationship with their parents. And that keeps going, that keeps, that kind of conversation between child and parent keeps going, doesn't it? Well, it
absolutely.
wasn't fair because he did that. Yeah. And everybody's opinion of you outside your classroom can change if the children perceive you to be unfair. So I think that's a really important point, actually. Okay, Paul, we're going to... in fact, before we move on to this last question that was pre-given...
Okay.
We are going to... I'm just going to pick up a couple of things that have been said, because now there's quite a lot of chat going on.
Okay, crikey. Right.
Somebody commented that they think that sanctions only work on certain students. And it reminded me of a discussion I had with a head teacher yesterday about the fact that detentions seem to be great for most of the kids and stop them, and are a good deterrent. But that's what they are, isn't it? Sanctions are generally, punitive sanctions are sometimes just a deterrent, and they will work on most students because they don't want to cross any sort of line. Yeah. Is that fair, do you think?
It's fair. I mean, there's no miracle cure with sanctions. Sanctions are a means to have a conversation with children about redrawing the line. I mean, and you look at the classroom steps, and I call them steps because they are steps. The first one is a reminder. The second one's a warning. Well, you could argue those are just they're not actual sanctions. The third one is your 30-second intervention. Lots of schools might have a 10-minute detention at break time in addition, attached to that. Many schools don't. The time out is a sanction, but essentially it's a 2 minutes out from learning. And then the restorative conversation is your traditional detention, where you sit down with a child and say, what the hell happened there? Like good parents would. And I think when you say sanctions don't work for some children, I think you're absolutely right. Absolutely right. But you still need to draw the boundaries. You still need to find opportunities to talk to those learners. In my spare time, I'm chair of governors of 7 pupil referral units in London and across the east of England. We deal with those children for whom sanctions do not work. But we still draw the lines for them. We still have those conversations with them. We still let them absolutely know when they've gone down the wrong path. And so the levers might be slightly different, but it's, for me, the sanctions are about just redrawing the boundary. And I think, you could call them sanctions, you could call them consequences. We're talking about pretty much the same thing. I don't create behaviour policies and processes with the idea that the process itself will suddenly and miraculously cure the behaviour. It's not true. And from the beginning of this course, we've been talking about it's your behaviour. It's how you conduct yourself. That's absolutely pivotal here. I mean, you could give a 30-second intervention, a scripted response to a poor behaviour, and you could do it with the wrong tone. too close physically, with a slight tinge of anger in your voice, and it wouldn't work. So, the strategies have to be accompanied by that real internal calmness that we're striving for.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, last question then. At least the last one that we've been given beforehand.
Okay. It can't already be an hour. I mean, it's just flown
nearly an
Incredible.
hour.
Okay.
So Roshan says,
Hello, Roshan.
I'm aiming to take a leading role in supporting new staff with behaviour management.
Great.
Would you be able to give me some ideas as the best way of going about this?
Okay. So lots of things you can do. So some of the things that I'd suggest straight away. When you get new teachers to go and observe brilliant teachers, and you'll have some brilliant teachers in your school, go with them. Don't send them on their own. Because some of these really exceptional teachers you can't see on your own. If you have no experience of classroom management, behaviour management, you go into the class, you can't see what's going on. So they need you to sit next to them and for you to show them what that teacher's doing and help them in their observation. So that, often initial teacher training starts with observation, and observation's a core part of what we do, but that needs to be assisted, that needs to be aided. They might even need to have a specific focus on behaviour that they're looking for with that member of staff.
It needs to be deconstructed, doesn't it?
Yeah, because I have the experience of sending students in to see people who are brilliant at behaviour management, and they come back and say, well, I didn't see anything, Paul. I say, what do you mean? I said, you've just seen Sue with the trickiest group of 14-year-olds I've ever met. She said, well, but I've not seen any chairs being thrown. I haven't heard any bad language. I've not seen any rules being broken. And it's because that teacher was constantly preempting and just nudging those children into the right routines and the right behaviour. But of course, she couldn't see it until I sat down with her and said, look what she's doing there. Look where she's moving. Look at that little non-verbal that she's given to that group. So unpick the fantastic practice you've already got. The second thing I'd say to you is use an audio recording. I really, really like audio recordings. You can do it on your smartphone. You can do it very subtly by just having a small little lapel mic here plugged into your smartphone or into a digital recorder, and just record the trainees while they're teaching. Video evidence or looking at videos, it has its value. But I tell you what, most teachers who look at videos of themselves they struggle to get over actually watching themselves, and their focus tends to be, oh God, I can't believe I was wearing that blouse, and my shoes are awful, and I didn't do my hair. Actually, the audio recording can be a really nice way to focus in on the talk, the tone of the lesson. It's a really nice step. You might use video appraisal later on in the process, but I think initially, particularly in that coaching role, that would be a really useful way of you reflecting on the lesson, not just with a load of notes and a tick sheet, but with actually, okay, this bit of the lesson when you said this, and I think you might have gone a little bit far there, and did you notice that while you were saying that this was happening? I think it's a really useful way in. So audio recordings are great. I think if you're going to be leading in supporting new staff, some coaching work for you would be very useful, because being coached yourself then starts to give you ideas about how you might be able to coach other people. I'm bound to say the Pivotal Instructor Program, where we train members of staff in your school to be the experts on the ground, and we have somewhere, how many instructors do we have now?
I don't know, we're training 90 in the next 2 weeks.
Right, we're training 90 in the next 2 weeks, and these are people who take our programs and deliver them in-house to small groups, large groups, and actually you become that behaviour expert because you're experienced, but also because you're being fed by us all of the cutting edge and leading edge work on behaviour. So that's a really good step. I'd also, if you didn't want to go that far, I'd be mining our resources. I'd be listening to our podcasts. I'd be sharing and talking weekly about the podcast or about certain podcasts. There are now 95 podcasts. We're drawing in 130,000 listeners worldwide to the podcast. So, that's an enormous free resource, and it's free to everyone. www.pivotalpodcast.com is an important, you need that, because that's keeping you up to date with what we're doing, and also with all the latest developments as well. Sorry, Ellie, you wanted to come in?
Only that I was going to say that, we do the free tips every week as well on behaviour, and I know, we've been doing this for years, maybe 9-10 years we've been sending out these tips. And I know, because I hear all the time from schools, that the person in charge of behaviour is getting those tips and they're sending them out to everybody. They're sending them out. It's that drip, drip, drip reminder of daily good practice. So every week, everybody gets a new tip in their inbox, and it comes, well, they can get it direct from us, but it can come from the person in charge of behaviour in the school, or the one that's there to support them.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it reinforces the fact that you're there to assist, and that you're there to coach and to support, and that they can come to you, and that you have the knowledge of some great resources out there. I think that's important too, isn't it?
I think it's really important that you have you have hands-on resources for when you need them, and for when those other staff need them as well. So yes, audio recordings, get some coaching yourself, mine the free resources, become a Pivotal instructor. Why wouldn't you? And interestingly, I was talking to some teachers in the last few days who had done a lot of work with us over a year at school. In fact, they'd done a lot of work. They'd had amazing results, absolutely incredible, totally transformational, totally transformed the school. And then for the last year, they took their eye off the ball and they started doing teaching and learning. All their CPD was teaching and learning. They didn't touch behaviour for a year. And I had a call last week saying, I should have listened to you. It's on the slide. We're back to where we were. And what they hadn't done is just kept that drip, drip, drip going. And you've got to have that. Behaviour is not going to go away just because we've done one course, we've had a couple of webinars. This has got to be that drip, drip, drip effect. In schools, you have so many staff coming in and leaving, so many people with different ideas and different angles, that you've got to revisit the training in whatever way, whether it's live, whether it's online, podcast, tips, articles, however it is, you've got to maintain that drip. And I think, one of the things about Pivotal and also about the National Science Learning Centres that we have the resources there, and then actually sometimes it's a bit of time to cherry pick the ones that are really pertinent to your setting, but there are plenty of resources out there so that you can start to structure sessions for newly qualified teachers and deal with some of the issues that they're coming up against. I mean, we had some questions tonight about ADHD and about Asperger's and ASD, and obviously those are complex needs and slightly more advanced than this course. But that if you put a search term for behaviour in the search bar of our website, you'll come up with videos, podcasts, audio recordings, articles. So you can do your own research into that by mining the resources on our website and also on the National Science Learning Centre's website as well.
That's excellent. Thank you very much, Paul.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. And we hope you've enjoyed the webinar. This is being recorded. I'm sorry about the slight technical issues right at the beginning.
Oh, we've forgotten about them. That was a long time ago.
Gone. And you can watch the recording again if you want to. You'll be given the link to do that. Because, of course, it's quite hard to put all the ideas, to get all the ideas down otherwise. So just now we've got a screen here. Don't forget that you can follow Paul at Twitter at Pivotal Paul. Yes. There's the website address there for the podcast and all the free resources on our website as well. And thank you very much to the National Science Learning Centres. Hope you enjoy the rest of the course and get cracking with the restorative justice.
We had lots of people on the webinar tonight, and some people from Australia. So if you're in the UK, have a good night. If you're in Australia, have a great day. And thank you for spending your morning over coffee with Pivotal Education and the National Science Learning Centres.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.